Welcome to the Miller Report. Today, I'm so honored to talk to these two people. Considering everything that's going on in the world, this really is so important to talk to two people today that are going to tell us their opinions about what's happening in the world. For centuries, the marriage of religion and politics have always been either a driving force or they divide us. So we're going to talk to today a rabbi. We're going to talk to Rabbi Potasnik and Reverend A.R. Bernard, and we're going to hear their opinion about the current events, about what's happening in today's world, and hopefully we're going to solve the world peace. So welcome to the Miller Report, Rabbi and Reverend, and thank you for coming here.
When I told the Reverend that we were going to do this, he thought we were doing this in the back of a taxi.
That's soon.
Because we see the Miller Report whenever we get into a cab. Mm-hmm. He says, so how are they going to film this in the back of a taxi? So thank you for clarifying that issue.
I appreciate that. And of course, thank you for the opportunity to be with you.
This is what happened on October 7th affected everybody. It affected every religion, every country, whatever side you're on. We've all been affected by it. And this is why it's so important as we're coming up to the year anniversary to talk about it and get your opinions. And I know, Rabbi, that you have a large congregation in Brooklyn. And I know, Reverend, you also have taken a grocery store and have, 1,000 members there now?
We started in 1978.
Wow.
In a storefront. Today we have 40,000 members.
Incredible.
Across 5 campuses.
What happened to that grocery store?
Was it Christides?
Yeah,
it became a Nathan's. It became a Nathan's, actually. Yeah, that's what happened.
Susan, I'm glad you opened up with October 7th, and I'm glad the Reverend is here for this reason. For me, October 7th was a day of disaster, but a day of definition, because it taught us who are our friends and who are not our friends, or those who claim.
We don't have many
friends, right? Well, a friend is a gift, that you give yourself, and I have been privileged to know Reverend Bernard for 25 years. And the reason I mentioned October 7th and the Reverend is because one of the first calls I received was from Reverend Bernard, condemning the atrocities of the day. Another call from Cardinal Dolan, condemning the horror of the day. And I thought to myself, this is a different time, because years ago we were all alone. As a child of Holocaust survivors, as you are, when religious leaders of different faiths will call you and stand with you, then you're certainly in a better place, even though you're hurting inside.
We are the part of the executive committee, Rabbi Potasnik and I, for the Commission of Religious Leaders, which goes back quite a few decades to the late 50s here in New York City. But it's made up of an interfaith body, individuals from different religious expressions. And we're there because we're very conscious of shared values, things that are part of what we believe within our faith context and are shared beyond what we believe in our faith context. And we're there not having to abandon our own faith tradition. We are uniquely different in many, many different ways.
So, Reverend, I'm going to start with this with you. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is very important. When the next day on October 8th, what was the next day that you had your sermon? Was it a few days later? Was it right after?
This was a few days later.
A few days later. What did you tell your congregation?
I told my congregation, number one, that based upon our faith tradition, it is very clear how we feel about the Jewish people, the state of Israel, and their right to exist. In that vein, we prayed for the state of Israel. We prayed for the Jewish people. We prayed for what was happening there. And I knew that it would call upon me to stand with my Jewish friends to say that I denounce this act of terrorism and violence, and that the Jewish people have a right to exist and to appreciate the history that goes back thousands of years, but also to know that they have a friend. And that's what took place. Did a series of interviews, phone calls as
You
well.
still say that even after what's going on with the Palestinians? Is
Oh,
that
absolutely. You know, look, as religious leaders, we bring a moral value consensus to society, and that's necessary for justice and concord because it transcends the political landscape, the social landscape. I believe that every human life is valuable, created in the image of God.
But a few months later, we started to see Israel fight back. We started to see displaced Palestinians and them dying, and nobody wants to see children being blown up. Did you still tell your congregation that you're standing with Israel?
Again, we elevate the conversation above the politics. So Palestinian life, Jewish life are both precious in that we are all made in the image of God. That's foundational to our belief system. However, the actions of, let's say, the state of Israel as a political entity, I can agree or disagree with those actions, but it doesn't take away from the fact that the Jewish people have a right to exist.
And we're attacked. How about you, Rabbi?
I just
what did
want
you
you
say?
to know that I'm not with the Board of, I've been with the Board of Rabbis for many, many years as the Executive Vice President. I'm removed from the congregational world for many years. We honored Reverend Bernard.
I would honor him.
And you say to yourself, rabbis are honoring a reverend. We also honored a cardinal, right? Because what we try to do as people of faith is speak with moral clarity. Reverend will talk about the prophetic voice. The prophet was not afraid to say what needs to be said, even if it wasn't popular, because it was principled. And Reverend stood up at this gathering of many people and said, I stand with the people of Israel. And everybody applauded him. The cardinal, shortly after October 7th, dedicated the first collection in the church to the people of Israel. Also made a significant commitment to the emergency fund for Israel. So I think if you really look at it with that lens of clarity, you can see what happened on October 7th was shameful, was disgraceful, inexcusable. You also, as a person of faith, look at the larger picture. Look, on Passover, don't we take a few drops out of the wine we drink to commemorate the Egyptians who lost their lives? So we don't look with detachment to the destruction of human life. We feel pain for others. We just also feel it shouldn't have happened, and it didn't have to happen because October the 6th, there was a ceasefire. October the 6th, we didn't have an attack. October the 7th was a different story. But let me go beyond this.
So I want to interrupt you a minute because you talked about cardinals and all these people that really stood in your corner, which is fantastic. What about the imams? Has anybody spoken to an imam and got their point of view? Because we all want to hear from them as well. I tried to get one of them to come here on the show with us, but that didn't work out.
I wish I could tell you that there was a plethora, of religious leaders from the Muslim world. There wasn't. But there are voices that came forward and said, what happened to the people of Israel perpetrated by Hamas is immoral. There were Muslims who said that. Again, more. But I got to tell you, there were Christians who didn't speak out as we would have wanted. There were those that did and those that didn't.
So no imam has reached out to you. You have not heard their point of view.
We are actually part of the executive committee for the New York State Interfaith Council, and we had recently a gathering of interfaith leaders. Included were imams.
And what is
they
their
were
position?
Muslims.
What are they saying?
And we talked about the issues. We actually broke up into groups for conversation, and I facilitated one discussion, and I had 3 imams at the table. And we were able to agree on certain aspects of what's going on and how it was handled, and to disagree as well. But at least we were able to have civil discourse. And to talk, yeah. And let me say something. My position in support of Israel is not a preference. It's a conviction. So when something is a conviction, it grows stronger under pressure. It's unchangeable. It's non-negotiable. And it's respected when people see that this is a conviction that you have. If it's a preference, it'll change over time. So for you to ask me, is my position still the same? Absolutely, because it's a conviction.
I like that.
We pray for peace.
We all want peace. We
Right?
all want peace.
But-
we want to be united. It's so wonderful. The country is the best.
Right, but it's conditioned on people wanting to live together in peace. You can't have peace with someone who seeks to destroy you.
So, Rabbi, I'm going to give you the keys. You're now the prime minister. You're Mr. Netanyahu Potasnik. How would you solve peace? What would you do? Do you believe in two-state? Do you think that Israel should annihilate all of Hamas? Like, what is your solution?
So, Suzanne, years ago, I learned never to answer hypotheticals, right? Because it's the people of Israel living there whose lives are on the line. And for me to say what I would do is...
What
it's very
suggestions do you have that you think could fix this issue?
You know, here's the dilemma. We want to see the hostages returned, and we don't want to have any more attacks on us. How do you reconcile that? How do you prevent another October 7th? You have two priorities at the same time, right? It's not, one and not the other. You want to protect your people from not being attacked. You want to bring those hostages home. I don't know.
I think it's important that you ask the definition of peace, because if we're talking about peace as the absence of conflict, then we don't understand the realities of human existence here. We both subscribe to a messianic return for me and first coming for you. But the reality is that for me, peace is the restoration of diplomacy, where we can sit at the table, have conversations, and realize that there will be trade-offs in order to sustain the absence of war and conflict where people are dying the way they are now. But will there be peace with someone who doesn't believe...
Lasting peace.
Will there be peace with someone who doesn't believe you have a right to exist? You're not going to find peace with that individual. You could only restore diplomacy where you can have conversation without the loss of lives.
So, Reverend, do you think that this two-state solution would be close to an answer?
I don't think so. For the simple reason is that Israel is surrounded by individuals who question, and nations that question their right to exist. Is that going to change without an ally like the United States? I don't think so. I think strategic allies will be important to preserve a standard that won't be violated, because the consequence can be much greater war than localized war by proxy nations.
Do you think wiping out Hamas completely is possible?
I think that we will wipe out Hamas when we can wipe out hatred in human beings.
Which is
not going to happen anytime soon.
So
I think confining it, controlling evil is the best that we can do at this particular time in human history.
Rabbi?
I think two states are good when you have two people who want to live together. There's a peace treaty with Egypt. There's a peace treaty with Jordan. There are the Abraham Peace Accords.
How this all started.
Right? But we were able to find partners. You need to have a partner, in peace. You can dance alone, but that's not what you want to have a partner when you dance. And unless you have that partner who believes, it's interesting. We have a prayer for peace that we both share. May the Lord bless you and keep you. And many people have heard that pronouncement. There are certain criteria. It has to be face-to-face. It has to be with an outstretched hand. It has to be with language that respects the other. If you don't have that, what does your prayer for peace mean? It's empty.
But let me be a little pragmatic here, because even the Abraham Peace Accord was a matter of balance of power. That's what was really going on. So if I'm going to arm the defenseless so that they can protect themselves at a level that can threaten your attack on them, I'm creating a balance of power. That's not really peace in the sense that we're no longer going to go at each other and respect each other's right to exist. Not going to happen.
So this is discouraging. You both don't think that the two-state solution is the answer, and you think we have to talk to one another and really mean it in order for there to be any resolution.
I think we're a long way.
We're a long way
from a two-state solution. I think if you were to take a poll today in Israel, you'd see a very unfavorable vote.
People in Israel do want a two-state solution.
I've seen polls that say just the opposite. You know, there's also the ideal and the real. So in the ideal, we like to live side by side. But in the real, we're not living side by side in a peaceful fashion. So how do you reconcile the ideal and the real? I think right now we're at the real. And you can have a vision, but right now it's
so many
reality.
lives are getting lost and on all sides. And I think blowing up all the Palestinian children, they're going to want to keep coming at you. There's no way to ever solve this.
The intent is not to blow up Palestinian children.
But it's happening.
Look what happened in World War II. How many innocent people died in World War II? Look what happened in Dresden. We didn't intend to destroy innocent life, but it's inevitable when you have a war. And there's a simple solution. If Hamas declared today, we're going to remove the declaration of hate in our charter, we're going to live with you, what do you think would happen?
I think there'd be peace.
All of a sudden you see a movement towards peace.
What do you think, Reverend?
I don't have the same level of confidence in human nature that you may have. I think that human nature is very predictable. And if we have a two-state solution and somewhere along the way Israel is prospering as a nation and the Palestinians are not, it's going to raise conflict between them.
And you've had peace proposals over the years. You had opportunities for peace that were rejected by the other side. But, you know, the Reverend and I share one thing in common. We're both prisoners of hope. No matter what, right? The word nevertheless is common to both our traditions. You know, there are those who hate us, but nevertheless, we're going to find a way to make, you know, a relationship work. You know, there are those who just seek to do everything to undermine our position, to undermine our welfare. But nevertheless, we're going to try to show them that there's a better path. So we're not going to give up on that vision, even though it's not the reality.
And to Rabbi's point, that's why I say there are no solutions, only trade-offs. What are we willing to give up? There's got to be a give and take in order to restore diplomacy. That we can do. That I can be hopeful of. So we stop the loss of innocent lives, both on the Jewish side and the Palestinian side.
Let's move on to the United States, which is what we really are here about today. Rabbi, how do you counsel Jews in your congregation about things like the pro-Palestinian, the Jews that are marching, the people that are Jewish and are hating Israel, or what do you tell your congregates about this?
I think one of the things that we've learned is some people have a very truncated view of history, or they have no knowledge of history. I think you have to ask, how did we get to this point? Why is it that after all these years, we still don't have peace between the parties? And I think if you look at the attempts that were made, if you look at the refusal to recognize the reality that there are two peoples, there are Jews and there are Palestinians, and neither one is going away, and we have to find a way to live together. If you ask the question, so why aren't we there? I think you're going to find that Palestinians, through their leadership, have been betrayed.
Maybe I asked the question wrong.
Why would Egypt not here?
Let me rephrase the question. What I'm asking you is about we're living in America and we're seeing on the college campuses not just pro-Palestinian people that are not Jewish, but we're seeing so many Jews against Jews. We're seeing Schumer. We're seeing people in politics that are against the Jews. How do you explain that, and what do you tell your congregation?
Firstly, I think there's a premise here that we need to state. I can be pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian. I can believe in a Jewish state and eventually a Palestinian state. If they're not contradictory, they're complementary, right? I think it's very unfortunate that we have a number of Jewish kids who see Israel as being culpable for all of the wrongs who don't take the time to fully understand the depth of what's happened. There are no simplistic solutions. But I think if you look at what's happened, you mentioned the dead children, where's the anger at Hamas?
But where is the anger of the United States citizens that are causing destruction at these rallies, and they're closing bridges, and they're closing institutions and hospitals? And some of them are Jewish. Reverend, what do you think about that?
First of all, when it comes to our elected officials, I would educate my congregation on the subject matter of political expediency and what elected officials engage in for the sake of political expediency.
For their own self-interest is what you're saying.
Let me paraphrase. I will let you take it wherever you want to go. I've made the statement. But I also appreciate the fact that we live in a nation where we can disagree, where we can voice our opinions, but within certain parameters. We cannot attack others physically. We cannot spew hatred and violence against individuals that we disagree with. No, we have to have civil discourse, and especially in our college campuses, because our educational institutions is a place for that kind of dialogue. That's where we explore differences of opinions and ideas.
Rabbi, you and I both come from families of Holocaust survivors. I don't know about you, but my mom used to tell stories about coming home from school and seeing them march on college campuses, or pogroms, or burning synagogues. So, isn't this awfully familiar?
Yeah.
And what do we do to stop this?
I think the question you asked earlier is, how is it we have Jewish kids who stand there with such contempt,
yes,
right, for the state of Israel? I think one of the mistakes we made is we as Jews spoke of tikkun olam. I hear this phrase all the time, repairing the world. But I think what was done was it was characterized or defined as outreach to the non-Jewish world, but not to the Jewish world. So we're there for others. We see the pain of others, but we don't see the pain of our own. And there are young people today who care more about others than their own people. And that is a failing of Jewish education. That is a failing of Jewish leadership, that we did not instill this kind of love for our people, not at the expense of others, but you also have to care for your own family. You don't overlook the pain of others, but don't overlook the pain of your own family.
I think also an oversimplistic view of what's going on. Rabbi talked about a truncated perspective of history. This conflict in the Middle East goes back 3,000 years. Right. So to try to say it's just recent and current, that's not true. So they have a truncated view of history. Also, when you think about the Palestinians, they're not a monolithic people. They've had several, 5 or 6 primary socio-political resolutions to their lived experience. Hamas gained the ascendancy by force. So does Hamas really speak for all Palestinian people?
No.
No. And we have to differentiate what is driven by terrorism internally as well as externally towards the Jewish people, right? And the reality of what the Palestinians have experienced over the last 20 years.
Well, we're seeing this. We're seeing that the Hamas is hiding weapons and civilian in hospitals. We know that. That's a fact. But back to America and the United States, all this destruction, these campuses, this spewing of hate, do you think these are outsiders? Do you believe that they're coming from different countries like Iran, or do you think these are our own citizens, Rabbi?
Well, we were talking with the chancellor of City University on a program, and I think he will tell you, as many other leaders will tell you, that many of these instigators are not members of the campus family. They're coming from the outside. But back to something you talked about earlier about kids turning on their own. Look, by the way, we have kids who are Americans who hate America, who have recently said...
But they're not burning flags and telling
people... They're burning American flags.
No, they were.
No, they're burning American flags.
I'm a child of the 60s. They were burning flags. kids on college campuses were being shot and killed by law enforcement and National Guard because they were against the American policy. They were in Vietnam.
Right.
They were against the military-industrial complex.
But weren't there penalties at that time? They went to jail. They couldn't just burn a flag. This is very lax now.
Well, there were a degree of penalties. It was much stricter. It was quite a shock to the American culture, this kind of resistance and pushback against American policy. So I think it was something new to American society. But we've gotten accustomed to this over the last 6 decades.
What do you tell your congregation about that?
I say that, again, thank God that we live in a society where we do have the freedom to express our disagreement with our government. I have traveled the world and I've been in countries where you will disappear if you go up against the government policy, legislations, etc. You don't have that freedom. But the greatest threat to freedom, it is said, is freedom. Even freedom has to have boundaries. It has to work within certain parameters in order to maintain itself. And when we go outside of those boundaries, all right, we lose freedom and we become subjects to other forms of human behavior.
Do you think you're alone in this, or do you think other Christian pastors feel like you do and they're telling their congregation this as well?
I've spoken to other Christian pastors, absolutely. We've talked about what's happening. We agree that we have the responsibility as clergy to elevate the conversation above the social and political landscape, but at the same time, we have to speak to our congregants and their lived experience. They're living in that reality. So we transcend the conversation, or elevate the conversation, rather, by saying all human life is precious. But we have to somehow find a way to live together. We have to.
Rabbi?
You know, for many years I've heard, and I still hear, that education is the answer. If only we educate people, all of a sudden our problems will disappear. And then I look at the college campuses and I see people who are educated, who are taking the most offensive stances in terms of recognizing the problem that we face. And then I look back at history, you talk about your family, my family. Educated people built death camps. Educated people developed the Nuremberg laws that discriminate against people. Educated people in this country had Jim Crow laws.
That's right.
So education without a moral component, unless we really teach people how to think, not what to think, but how to think in terms of having a moral equation in there, to look at something and saying, you know, what here is right and what is wrong, but really taking the time to examine it, then we're on this failed path. And I think that's what we're seeing today.
And that's important. Teddy Roosevelt, he said, to educate a man in mind, but not in morals, is to educate a menace to society. Yeah. And that is absolutely true.
So last question. Let's talk about the election coming up. So we could talk about that for hours, right? So, Reverend, who do you think is better for religion in the United States? Do you think it would be Trump to unite us? Or do you think it would be, because everybody wants to unite us, it is the United States. Or do you think it'll be Harris?
You're asking me personally.
I'm asking you personally.
I do not believe that either political party and its representatives, all right, will do anything for the realm of faith and the world of faith that is not politically expedient for their agenda. That's very, very important.
Politician answering.
That's very, very important to me, because I don't want to think that the Republican Party is the party of God and the Democratic Party is the party of atheism and anti-God, because I know the history of both parties. All right. So I'm not looking at a history that began, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I'm looking at a history that began when the Republican Party was the party of Lincoln, especially favored in terms of the African-American experience. But I'm also aware how that shifted in the 1960s in reaction to the civil rights movement and the changes that were made. And the reason why people of color shifted to the Democratic Party, because they were pushing civil rights and a response to the social ills that a disenfranchised, marginalized people were experiencing. So both parties have a checkered past when it comes to my religious beliefs, my religious freedom, and my social concerns. So to ask me which president is going to make the difference in terms of my religious beliefs, I'm not secure to say that one will do it over the other, because I know that that can change just like that when it's no longer politically
Which
expedient.
president do you think will be better for the United States?
I'm not going to answer who I think should become the next president of the United States. I have very personal views about that.
Okay.
I do know where I plan to vote. And
you're not going to share that here at the Miller
of course not. Absolutely not.
Can I ask you later?
But I will say that people vote their concerns before they vote their values. Even though we're told, vote your conscience, vote your values. It's not true. People vote their immediate concerns. I have a concern for the direction that this nation is going in ideologically. And that is what's going to guide where my ballot will drop on election
Do
day.
you tell your congregation your opinion on this?
No, absolutely not.
So you don't?
I tell them that they have a responsibility to vote. Voting is a sacred civil responsibility and a privilege in our nation, because not everyone in our nation has the right to vote. And I'm not talking about illegal aliens. I'm talking about if you're in prison and you're a felon, you can't vote. So it is a privilege for us to exercise our right to determine who we trust at the helm of power for our nation.
Rabbi, will you answer the question?
Suzanne, you're asking me in a studio owned by WABC.
I've had a lot of Democrats here.
Who is the
He's
preferred-
considering the context.
Oh, you think John won't fire you?
Considering the context.
It's a dangerous position to be in. Look, Rev and I have been through many elections, and I've always heard this election is the most important in the history of the Republic. And here we are after the most important election 25 years ago, and as my father was saying in Yiddish, Mizan and do it. We're still here. So I think we as clergy do not have a responsibility to endorse a candidate. What we have a responsibility to do is to endorse an issue, to speak about an issue, and to say, my tradition or our tradition looks at this issue with the following lens. And therefore, let's ask these questions before we vote, and you arrive at who. Because I have friends, by the way. We have communities on both sides. Years ago we had Rabbi Eben was the foreign minister of Israel and ambassador to the UN, and he said one day, "I want to meet a one-armed rabbi." He says, "Why do you want to meet a one-armed rabbi?" The person said, "Because every time I ask a rabbi a question, well, it could be this way. It could be this way." He says, "Just give me one answer without."
So just give me one answer.
It's a balancing act.
Rabbi, give me one answer. Here's my specific question, okay? No. For Israel, as a one-issue voter, in your personal opinion, if you don't want to answer, I'll respect that, but I would like our audience to know, as a rabbi, for the state of Israel, between Harris and Biden, are you willing to tell us who do you think will make Israel safer?
I think what will make Israel safer is when Israel continues to be a bipartisan issue.
You're not answering the question.
Well, I don't want to see Israel become the Republican state of Israel or the Democratic state of Israel. I think we need both parties. Given the predicament we're in, is it healthy for us?
But you can't vote for two people.
No, I'm going to vote for one.
Do you want to share with us?
But I don't think people are waiting to hear what Reverend Bernard, how we're going to vote.
We do want to hear, because you're educated. You talk to thousands of people. You probably know more than most average people about who's going to be, as a rabbi, who is better for Israel.
I will ask them the same question. When you go in, you have to decide. But at the end of the day, if I tell them to vote one way and they think this is the only way, what happens when the other party wins? How do we do when it's only one party, right? I think we have to look at both and say, who's got a track record, who supports us, who shares our views, and I think you're going to find people saying, it's this way, and it's this way, and ultimately you have to decide which way it is. But as clergy, we have to teach people how to think, how to incorporate tradition into their thinking, not what to think.
And that's important. Politics is power. Who has it? How do they get it? How are they using it? Should they keep it? Who's benefiting most from it? Take a look at those questions. Answer those questions.
Both politicians have been asked on so many occasions about Israel, and they both advocate, and they say that all they're going to do without, they're saying they're going to without specifically how they're going to do it, which is why I tried to ask you. But I do respect that you both can't answer this, but this has been fantastic. You have any questions for me?
When do we see ourselves in the back of the cab? 'Cause
Monday.
I want to know when to. I want to know when to hail the cab.
Every Monday.
But thank you for what you do. I think we have a responsibility to use our platforms and our voices to stimulate thought, to teach people how to think, not tell them what to think. I have a problem when we're telling people what to think.
And if I could just add, we're living at a time of heightened anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism like we've never seen before. But I also know when we're under attack, we're going to have people, we're going to have friends who stand with us. When a synagogue has suffered an anti-Semitic attack, I know that we're going to have a perimeter of non-Jews standing with us as we've seen in the past. We saw that in Charlottesville. Non-Jews standing and saying to those hate mongers, you want the Jews? You got to go through us. We've seen it here in New York, standing around different houses of worship. So nevertheless, we see the hatred, but nevertheless, we see the love from people who care about us.
I always want to end with this. I have a friend, I hope he's listening. It was my first phone call on October 7th, and he's Italian, really Italian. And he said, I want you to know that I'm standing with the Jews. All my friends are standing with the Jews. It's not about the Jews. It's an attack on America. So we're just going after, they're going after the Jews first, but they're coming after all of us after, and we see what's going on, and I really thank him. And I think a lot of people do see that. It's the Jews are the first line of attack because they're the usual, the leaders, they're the people with the money, so go after them, and then it's the rest.
It starts with the Jews. It
Starts
doesn't
with
stop
the
with
Jews. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I think that beyond strategic allies, the Jewish people, the State of Israel, with American society, they are a portal to American culture.
Thank you so much for coming on the Miller Report, and this has been fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. This is great.